With our economy in free fall, news of an industry, any industry, in serious decline or even perhaps on its deathbed, it's becoming all too common. But there is one industry whose current troubles pose not just an economic threat to our country, but also to how we view our nation and what we even know about it. Make no mistake, newspapers could soon become as extinct as the dodo or the dinosaur, and that it could impact nearly every aspect of American life. Now, all this week, RFL, we're going to put newspapers under the microscope as we begin our special series tonight with our own Andrew Whitman. And Andrew, we can't exaggerate how big a deal these developments in this industry are.
You know, all we can do is try to show people how and why, Rich. For years, people have held on to specific copies of newspapers as collector's items, marking like a time capsule our major events. So people have mementos of moments like Barack Obama's election and inauguration, the September 11th attacks, even the day our teams win World Series or Super Bowls. But soon, the papers themselves may become collector's items, and some, too many people worry, are now themselves nothing but memories. It is happening anywhere and everywhere, from Denver.
Tomorrow will be the final edition of the Rocky Mountain News.
To Seattle.
Hearst is announcing today that the PI will become an online-only news operation. And the last print edition will appear tomorrow.
And in almost every city in the U.S., newspapers are either shutting down, going online only, or slashing staff. Along with the Post-Intelligencer and the Rocky Mountain News, we've seen both papers in Detroit, the Free Press and the News, go online only. The Kansas City Kansan, gone. So too the Cincinnati Post and its sister paper, the Kentucky Post, and a trio of papers in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Just a few of the more recent shutdowns. Add to that a string of papers in deep financial trouble. The Denver Post, now the only paper left in Denver, on the edge. The New York Star-Ledger with open talk of a possible shutdown. And both Philadelphia newspapers, the Inquirer and the Daily News, are in bankruptcy. Major newspaper groups have made cuts and threatened shutdowns of their own. McClatchy and its 30 newspapers seeing staff cuts and possible shutdowns. The Tribune Company, owner of 10 newspapers, including the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times, is also in bankruptcy. Hearst, which already closed the paper in Seattle, could do the same at any of its 15 remaining papers. And Gannett, the largest newspaper chain in the United States, with USA Today and 88 local papers, including the Hudson Valley Journal-News, the Asbury Park Press, the Wilmington News-Journal, and 10 other papers in the RNN region, has slashed staff and forced employees to take 1 week unpaid furloughs. Even papers thought to be untouchable are proving not to be. The New York Times and subsidiary Boston Globe needed $250 million in financing and had to lease out part of its Manhattan headquarters, while the Washington Post has quietly eliminated newspaper sections and staff. When you consider the coverage reach of each paper into metro and suburban areas, plus some with statewide coverage and declines in national newspapers as well, the scope of the problem becomes more clear. There is not a section of the U.S. not impacted by the growing newspaper crisis.
I'm worried about the information and the depth that society is going to be getting from here on in as newspapers start contract more and more.
Experts like Arlene Morgan say much will now be missed, not politics or the plane crash in the Hudson or the nation's current financial mess. Those will still end up in print.
The story I'm worried about is really looking in depth at the school, how the schools operate. How are they spending money? What are the kids really getting out of their school, their tax dollars? I worry about, looking at the health of a community and the social services of a community.
Stories that can only be told with manpower, man-hours, persistence, and contacts.
Every time you lose a pair of eyes on government, then citizens have less access, and it's a real loss.
People will rely on the computers to go online to get information. So we're in an information age, and that's what's going to happen.
And while newspaper contraction may push readers to the web, it's actually the web in large part pushing newspapers to the brink of extinction. The first blow came back in the mid-90s as sites like Craigslist eroded newspaper classifieds. The classifieds were once cash cows for newspapers, often generating more than half their ad revenue. Sellers would pay for the placement, then customers would pay to buy the papers to access them. But Craigslist provided a free forum for both buyers and sellers, and newspapers only caught on too late.
Craigslist has killed the classifieds, whereas newspapers knew it. They could have done their own Craigslist a long time ago. They knew something like that would happen, and they didn't react to it.
More recently came newspapers in online form. Most papers resisted the idea of offering their content online.
That they saw it as a marketing device to get people to buy the paper. They never saw it as a product in itself, a different way of doing newspaper work, a different way of presenting stories.
And when newspapers did reluctantly move online, they did so with little or no financial success. Readers resisted the move unless the content was free.
Now I'm seeing some newspapers like the Tribune company trying to charge for sort of the version of the Chicago Tribune that looks like the Chicago Tribune. Well, why in the hell are somebody going to go and pay for that when they can still go to the Chicago website and get the whole thing for free?
And their attempts to find advertisers for online news was thwarted by another obstacle, the rise of compilation sites like Google or Yahoo News. They do almost no original reporting, but link to other web sources, or simply copy what newspapers have done, giving them credit but few eyeballs.
Where do people think the news online comes from? If we kill all the news organizations and we kill all the newspapers, the richness of what we have online is going to disappear.
Other internet clipping sites pose other dilemmas. The Drudge Report and Huffington Post have become wildly popular in recent years, but they have political leanings and are likely to push readers to stories or slants that support their biases.
If you're only going to one site all the time or a couple of sites all the time, you're getting sort of the same mindset, the same political philosophy. So you're never getting a chance to read somebody who might be different than you are.
Which begs the question, where else could news consumers go for information?
I think we'd turn to news channels probably to figure out what was going on.
But much of what radio and television reporters cover begins with newspaper stories, or as RNN had done and other stations continue to do, are partnered with newspapers.
Radio stations and television stations are dependent on the newspapers to do the reporting. Most of them don't even have credible staffs to send out on anything other than a cop story. So I actually think we're in real serious trouble if that happens.
So information will still come, we'll just get less of it, and with fewer experts to check the validity of what you hear or read. A dramatic fall from grace for an industry often viewed as something close to a public service until now.
So just how serious is this trend of newspaper decline? Even the most read newspapers in the nation, USA Today, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, have seen dramatic drops in their circulation levels, though their online readership rates have significantly increased.